my name is Jay McFarland, and I want to welcome you to the Wealth Made Simple podcast. This show is dedicated to sharing stories of consumers and financial professionals, along with their experiences within our growing community. Now, in this series, we'll highlight financial professionals who are committed to providing financial literacy and empowerment for all. Through this podcast, our platform will change the way consumers ask questions and get answers for financial questions. Now, I'm super excited to introduce you to Ralph Mitchell. I want you to focus in on how childhood experiences formed his entire future and guided him to a place where he helps out people every day with their life planning, their financial planning, and how he has also turned service in the military into a way to help others.
I'm a third-generation American soldier. My father, unfortunately, did not survive Vietnam. He was killed back in '64 when they were only sending over small teams of advisors. He was not a Green Beret. He was just a plain old everyday infantry platoon sergeant. He had been a veteran from the Korean War. He thought he was going to be something like a drill sergeant trained in the South Vietnamese Army. No mention on his orders about hostile duty, hazardous pay, or any of that other things. And unfortunately, he was only there 8 months before he got killed in a roadside bomb.
Wow.
My mom didn't want me to go in, but I went in anyway because I always thought it was something fun. Everything she tried to keep me away from, there was something fun about it. Staying up late, partying with these wild kids up the street. And so the more she tried to keep me away from the Army, the more I went in head first.
So you served, and thank you for your service. And then how do you go from serving in the military to Carthage Financial Group? What does that journey look like?
Well, one of my clients, who's a psychologist, psychoanalyzes everybody and everything. She even psychoanalyzed me, but I didn't know it at the time. She was very subtle in some of her questions and some of the ways she was getting information out of me. But the truth of the matter, after my father died, now picture this, my mother was a 1950s style housewife. She managed everything within the four walls of the house to include us kids. Everything outside of the house was his domain. So she didn't know just how screwed up his personal finances really were. He died, he got killed in action, and if the Army hadn't provided him with a military funeral, she'd have had to sell our house to give him a decent burial.
Wow.
And so that put us in what I like to sometimes call economic holocaust that lasted for 14 years.
Wow.
So when I got old enough to go to college on an ROTC scholarship, Army ROTC, what did I want to study? I didn't care about history, philosophy. I wanted to study money because we didn't have any. And I wanted to make sure that my family never had to go through that type of poverty ever again. Now, we weren't the poorest on the street, but then again, there were a lot of nice little luxuries that we could have enjoyed had things just been planned a little better.
Yeah, that's powerful. So that still drives you and motivates you today then, I'm guessing.
Well, that always motivated me because in public school, at least when I was coming up back in the late 60s, early 70s, they didn't talk about economics and finance that much. It was like, you'd hear more about sex than you'd talk about money. But we had a class in sex ed, but we never had a class on financial literacy.
Right.
And so when I graduated from college, here it was, the same night, graduation. I'm also marched back out on the stage. A colonel pins the gold bars on me. I'm now a second lieutenant, U.S. Army, going in the infantry. And when I was on active duty, I realized that most of those privates in my unit, this was their very first job, period, other than high school type stuff, mowing lawns, bagging groceries, typical odd jobs that high school kids get. And so I knew most of them had no clue about trying to fill out a tax return. And so at the time, I was being a second lieutenant and being one of the few single officers in the battalion, I was always stuck on all the ash and trash details for the captains and the first lieutenants who want to do the second lieutenants, who was the bottom of the barrel. That was me. I got stuck with. And so I knew on certain weekends I'd be stuck on duty It's Saturday. I can't go anywhere. I got to hang out down there at either brigade headquarters or battalion headquarters. And so I put the word out to all the troops in my unit that when it was coming up to tax season, before tax season rolled around, I called the local IRS office and I said, "My name is Lieutenant Ralph Mitchell. I'm calling from such and such a unit. I don't represent the entire division. I only represent just Alpha Company such and such." In which case, I ordered all these copies of the 1040, all these copies of the 2106, all these different forms. I ordered triplicate of what I really needed because I knew that these guys, they screw up the first one. So therefore, the first one was a learning page. So they had learned to make all the mistakes and screw up. But the second one, blank, that's where they copied from the first one to put the final answers on before sending it in. And at the time, I was doing this on a Saturday, usually not early Saturday morning, because these guys, when they be getting up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, Friday night, they're going to go get blitzed. They're going to go out drinking, skirt chasing, having a good time. And so Saturday, they're not going to budge until about 10 o'clock, especially considering they've been out till 3, 4 in the morning. So therefore, I'd let them go out, do their thing, get blitzed. Sometimes I wish I was out there with them, but I couldn't. But then Saturday, we'd talk about taxes. And I explained to him, I said, "Hey, this is the government used to signing everything last name first, but this is civilian government. They want to see your first name, then your last name." And so I showed him how to do a 2106 for unreimbursed expenses and things such as it being in the infantry. We all had extra pieces of equipment because the stuff they gave us was crap or it was old, ragged, whatever. And so everybody went out and bought something of their own because it was better than what they got issued. And we all had extra uniforms, extra field gear, extra everything. And so I told them, okay, no one's reimbursing you for any of that. So let's fill it out on the 2106 so you can get some of your money back. I even included in there haircuts because I said, look, this is the 70s. Everybody out of the military had long flowing hair or big bushy hair. Only Uncle Sam was making us go around with the skinhead look, and believe me, that was not cool. You don't get a whole lot of play from the ladies when you look like the oddball. So I even put down the fact that we had to get a haircut. What was the cost? Put that down and get a reimbursement for it. Because if the Uncle Sam wanted us to have it, they ought to give it to us for free. But when they weren't, we had to pay for it. And for some of my older ones who were sergeants, when they had to move because of military orders, I showed them how to fill out the moving expense form. So therefore, I said, look at it this way. According to the tax codes, every expense that you have for your first 30 days is a tax deduction because your household goods haven't arrived yet. You're living out of a suitcase. Your kitchen isn't set up. You're eating out all meals. When you got a wife and a few crumb snatchers, it doesn't take long for that money to really run up a tab. And so for long story short, most of my sergeants was getting back, I'd say, equivalent of 3 months worth of pay. Some of my privates were getting back 2 months worth of pay. And all of a sudden, this is not money that they got to work for. It's just filing the paperwork right, getting back what Uncle Sam is taking out of them. And so here it was. I was one of the most respected men in the whole brigade.
I'll bet.
I was
I'll
putting
bet.
money back in these guys' hands. They're
Mm-hmm.
using, they're buying new stereo equipment. Some of them shopping around at car dealerships. They were styling out when they started getting those checks in there. And even though I could not charge them any money, I explained to them, I said, look, I'm teaching you how to do it yourself because I may not be here next year. But whoever does, and you may be somewhere else, but at least you'll know how to do it and how to get the most back for what's been taken out of you. And so to show their appreciation back, a couple of mechanics, they said, hey, Lieutenant, bring that Mustang to the motor pool on Saturday. I put a new lube job on for you. Hey, Friday night we're having steak in the chow hall. I got the biggest, thickest porterhouse with your name on it. It was just little things like that they
Yeah.
did to show their appreciation. But now one funny story I'll tell you, then I'll shut up. Because I can go on forever and a day. We had this one major who was the second in command of our battalion. They called him Major Haas because he looked just like Haas Cartwright from Bonanza. He was even from Texas, just like the actor Dan Blocker. But the Haas Cartwright character was a gentle giant. This son of a gun was mean as a snake that we had to deal with. And so here it was. He saw me one afternoon. Mitchell, get in my office. And I come running in there, snapping a salute. Lieutenant Mitchell reporting as erected, sir. They tell me you know about taxes. How the hell you know about taxes? And I said, with all due respect, sir, that's what I studied my last 3 semesters in college. Oh, really? You been charging these men any money? I said, no, sir. We've been doing it right there in Alpha Company's classroom. The forms are all IRS issued. They even signed it with a U.S. Army government skilled craft ink pen. The only thing they paid was the postage to mail the thing in. And he's sitting there and he's giving me a mean look. He said, well, I got a special project for you. He reaches around the desk, pulls out a shopping bag. Here's mine. You're doing mine tonight. I said, sir, I can't do that. I'm supposed to be the officer in charge of a night fire. Bull crap. He got on the phone. Whitaker, you find some other lieutenant to do this. I got Mitchell on a special assignment here in my office under my supervision. And tomorrow night, you're doing the colonel and the sergeant major. And if you
that's
screw
fantastic.
it up, your ass is in the frying pan.
That is funny.
But
That is
I
a great
kept with it
story.
because I remembered what my dad did not do, some of the things that could have been, but he didn't know. And I realized that in the Army, they teach you how to win a battle, how to fight, how to survive out in the battlefield. They don't teach you about how to manage your finances and survive in that type of environment.
Yeah, and wouldn't you agree, Ralph, that it's still the same? I mean, we're still not doing financial lit classes in high school. We're still not teaching people how to manage their finances. We'll teach them how to be even a doctor or a lawyer, but they still have to figure out the financial side of the equation.
Right. The only service component I can say does a little bit different, though, is the Air Force. Because on every active duty air base, they'll have a personal finance unit there. Now, their mission is, let's say, for instance, you have some of the enlisted troops in the Air Force that got kind of overextended. They only make but X amount, but they got too much debt, in which case they can go speak to one of the counselors there who are people in uniform. Usually the commander is a warrant officer, not a commissioned officer, but a warrant officer, which means that he or she had been a sergeant at one point in time, but decided to go a different route, and therefore, based on their expertise, they become a warrant officer. Just like you have some medical people who are physician's assistants. They're not a nurse, but they're not a doctor either.
Mm-hmm.
And so here they have those in the Air Force to help with budgets and other types of strategies, but no long-term things such as making investments. But that was my last contact with any of them was many, many moons ago. Now they've been pushing the federal thrift savings plan, and so I'm not exactly sure how that's been faring.
Right.
Because at one point,
who are your target clients with Carthage Financial Group?
My target clients, when I first came into this, I'll admit I was a young stockbroker at Merrill Lynch, but not that young because I'd already done time in the military and had worked in corporate America for a while with Hershey Chocolates and Johnson and Johnson. But my goal was finance because I used to sit back and say there's a lot of things that could have been different in my family had they just done something different.
Right.
And believe me, a passbook savings account is not the end-all solution. It's the lowest paying thing that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so on that note, when I was at Merrill, I was probably on average 10 years older than a lot of the rookies they hired. But then they gave me no clients. I had to go out and find all of my own clients. Now, if I was better politically connected, I might have been given a few accounts. But not having an older relative higher up the food chain somewhere in the organization, I was on my own. And so a lot of my initial clients were relatives, friends of mine, in a lot of cases, military people. And I love it as a reservist that send me somewhere for 2 weeks on active duty, because then I would go ahead and I get a chance to meet other people, usually officers, captains, majors, lieutenant colonels, might be a bird colonel or a general. And that after I've done the military thing, because as a reservist, I had to prove to them that I was just as capable as anybody else at my rank and number of years of service. And I could follow lockstep with whatever they were doing. And after I've proven that, then some of them say, what the heck you do in the real world? I said, well, I turn nickels into dimes. Nickels into dimes? What are you, some sort of freaking counterfeiter? I said, no. I started explaining things like asset allocation, and I explained the rule of 72, how you can more
Mm-hmm.
or less calculate the return, how you set certain parameters in terms of minimum returns you want to see coming back. And in which case, those days I always carried two suitcases. Two briefcases rather. One with all the military stuff, and the other was with investment stuff. And most cases in military circles, I had very little competition. I might have somebody who worked back then. It was USPA, which later became First Command. That's usually a retired military person who now works for this outfit as a civilian, and their goal is to go back on the base and to sell products to all their former colleagues.
Mm.
But their extent of knowledge is only what it took to get them licensed and whatever product they're pushing. And one of the times I was talking to a Navy guy, I said, let's look at it this way. Here we are. You have a certain amount that you want to see happen. Now, rather than a picture from a military perspective, tactically, instead of me being along the shoreline where I could be taking pot shots from people hiding in the bushes, hiding behind trees, let's go farther out in the deep, deep water. If anybody wants to come after me on a fast attack boat, I got more firepower to blow them out of the water a dozen ways. And that's the same when it comes to this. Instead of being limited to just a life insurance policy or maybe the annuity or maybe some mutual fund with mediocre performance, I can take it out there to a whole new realm where we could look at some of the most innovative stocks that are out there. We can look at various other products, such as commercial real estate. We can look at bonds. We can look at a variety of things. And the overall concept is based on the fact that this is your money. I have no allegiance to one product or the other based on who pays what because I'm not on commission. I work for you. I'm charging a very modest fee, and my job as a fiduciary is to make recommendations that I see to be in your best interest, not mine. So it don't matter to me what we go into because I want to grow your account because as your account grows, my fees will grow, but the same perspective will stay the same. And if at the end of the year, if I've made more money than you have, something is horribly wrong.
Yes.
And on that note, I've had clients, some of whom been with me for more than 25 years. I'm dealing now with their adult children or their adult grandchildren because who's a better advocate for me? All of a sudden, you got good old trusted dad. You got Uncle Joe. I made him money. Now, all of a sudden, the young kid, well, if he worked and made them money, I want him to make me some money.
Yeah. Yeah. So when do
And
people
even times
come?
I've been at a guest speaker at something like a middle school or a high school, I'd say, look at finance. It's a bucket type of subject. Picture one third math. We're not going as far as algebra and calculus and trigonometry, but just basic math. One third math, one third current events, and one third history.
Mm.
And now when I say current events, you got to look at where the flow of money is headed. Now, in a situation where you see on the news certain things are taking place, okay, who is going to benefit from it? Because no matter how bad the economy might be in your corner of America, somebody on this planet is making money. Now, is there a way of tapping into it? If we just go with that particular industry, we might take a broad brush of stroke and go into a mutual fund or an ETF or maybe an annuity. But if you want to get real deep in the weeds, then we'll go with an individual stock. My first big score. This was when I was still in college. 18 was considered legal age for a while. So I opened up my first brokerage account at 19. And here it was. This was when Vietnam was winding down. And I saw a little known airline named Braniff Airline had this government contract to be bringing the troops home from Saigon to either
Mm.
LA International or to San Francisco. And what did I do? Braniff was selling for $6 a share. I bought it. Couple of hundred shares. Year and a half later, I sold at 26 a share.
Mm.
I felt, hey, when the war is over, game over, take the money and run. And even back when George W. was president, this is going back a few years ago, And at the time, there was this company, KBR, Kellogg, Brown, and Root. Now, I remember reading in the papers about how they were doing a lot of the missions. This is a civilian organization doing a lot of the support missions that in previous armed conflicts we had people in uniform doing. They even had on 60 Minutes. KBR was in Dallas, Texas, recruiting civilians to go to Kuwait and go to place in the Far East to set up military bases. And they interviewed this one older woman who was in her late 50s. And she said, well, I'd be glad to go. And I said, why do you want to go? Don't you know it's dangerous? And even though they kept saying you're going to a potentially dangerous area, you may see mortar fire, you may be bombed by aircraft, and you may have insurgents coming through shooting. And then this old woman said, look at it this way. I've been a cafeteria worker in one of Dallas's public schools for many, many years. You seen inside of them lately? Now, if I'm over there and I'm around thousands and thousands of men, I might just find a new boyfriend. Women are going to be scarce and I'm going to look good. And considering they were going to pay this woman who had been making 30 and change as a cafeteria worker, they're going to pay her over 80,000 to do this over somewhere in the sandbox. And she said if she just did it for 3 years, she'd save her money, have enough to pay off her mortgage, and after that, decide what's going to happen next, but at least she'd never have a mortgage to worry about. And yeah, I looked at KBR, and so I did do some homework, this being the information age, spent a lot of time on Google and other sources, found out that they were owned by a company called Halliburton. Halliburton, Dick Cheney at the time, who was vice president, he had been the CEO.
Yep.
And so no wonder KBR was getting all these big, big contracts with very, very little competition. Mm-hmm. And so I told a lot of my clients, I said, look, let's go into Halliburton. If it's not according to your taste, you don't like the politics, I can't control that. When it's election time, you go in that ballot booth, close the shade, and do what you think is best. Let your heart, your conscience be your guide. But in the meanwhile, if there's a way for us to make some money out of this, let's make some money. And so that's what I did. Everybody went into Halliburton back then. This is before we started into the main commitment into the Gulf. A lot of them saw their money almost triple. Not everything, but what money they had put into Halliburton is what almost tripled. And then here, most recent, let's look at the situation with the COVID.
Yeah.
Now, COVID, it's a bad, bad thing. Some people want the vaccine, some don't want the vaccine. I say, hey, you're an adult, you let your brain think, let your conscience be your guide. But meanwhile, what did I start putting people into? First, I was looking at 3M. Because when it was first came about, one of the first things I noticed on a newscast, it showed people in Korea wearing protective gear. And right on those plastic face shields, right above their eyes, it had the 3M logo. So what does that say? 3M is making the protective gear. So I put people in 3M. Then I put them into Novartis based on what President Trump said, which turned out to be a lie. Yeah. Novartis wasn't taking the lead, but I got them out of that. But then we went into companies like Johnson & Johnson. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, if they're coming up with a vaccine, it may not be the best, but at least it's a vaccine. But then Moderna, which is in my area, a somewhat local company, they're in Cambridge, Mass., which is only about 30-some miles away. I went in heavier in the Moderna. Do I own stock in Moderna? Yes. Do a lot of my family members? Yes. And how's it done? Real good.
Really?
A lot of my clients, they look at their statements once a month, they smile, they see Moderna. They may not smile at some of the other stuff they may have, but then, hey, I say, I don't believe in putting all the eggs in one basket. Let's spread it around a little bit. Because what if we put it all into one and the thing crapped the bed, then you wouldn't be happy.
Right.
But at least if you got one home run out of it, it may make up for some of the little lesser things that weren't quite as stellar in terms of performance.
Mm-hmm.
But still, like I say, current events. And then the other piece, history. I want to see the stock history behind it. How long has this stock been performing? What's the history of the management? Have they been doing this a while, or are these a bunch of political hacks who don't know what they're doing because Grandpa said they ought to be put as president? Uncle Jack said they should be the president. Fine, but what are they doing? Do they have a history of success? That's the question. And the big thing, are they making any money? I tell people that when you see the news about the earnings reports, that's when it comes out. Is that company making any money? It's like their report card. If they're not making any money, then why the heck are we in there with it?
Right.
If they want to take the money and do all kinds of stupid stuff, let them use somebody else's money, not ours. Let's go somewhere else.
Yeah,
And with
I
some
love your
people just
philosophy.
starting out, I said the quickest thing to decide where we're going to put your money, let's open up your checkbook. See what you're spending your money on, no matter what the industry is. Prime example, I have two clients, husband and wife. She is very, very conservative, very, very religious. He, on the other side, totally opposite. I told him about a chain of nudie bars called Rick's Cabaret. Oh, he wanted to go into that. He bought into Rick's back when they were like $20 a share. Now they're over $70 a share. She, on the other hand, she doesn't want no alcohol, no tobacco, nothing to deal with arms and weapons. So I found a mutual fund. Trading symbol is Bless, BLESS, where what they do is they look for things based on Christian religious
Oh,
values.
okay.
Companies that have done a lot in terms of community donations, community involvement, trying to create positions for handicap. I said, okay, that's what she wanted to put her money into. And I said, okay, rather than try to do all the homework and dig and find such companies, here's a mutual fund that does nothing but that. So we'll put it into that. No, she was happy with that. He, on the other hand, he would have been miserable. They've seen growth, but their growth is on average like 6% a year. The stuff he's into, things like Rick's Cabaret and some cannabis companies, and also Budweiser, the biggest beer company on the planet. Budweiser has seen a little bit of decline, but he's still happy with it. He said, okay, they got over 100 different brands. You look at them on a global basis. So even though the demand for beer in one corner may slacken, the demand for somewhere else is just picking up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I love your passion, Ralph, and I love your philosophy. Can I ask you, what do you get most excited about when you get up in the morning? What are you looking forward to most each day?
What I look forward to each day, when people say, well, how's the day going? I say, it's another day in paradise. I think about the times when I was in the military, and we'd be out there cold, hungry, miserable, sometimes sleeping outdoors in the pouring rain. I'm inside a building like a normal human being. I got decent food. This is paradise in comparison. I don't have a bunch of idiots to put up with.
Yeah, well, what a great perspective, and think about how much you've changed your life and other people's lives compared to your childhood and what you went through.
Yes, exactly. Because I tell people poverty does not have to be permanent. Because it may be permanent for one generation, but then there's another generation coming up. In which case, what can we do to try to make it better for the next generation? In which case, with the parents, the grandparents, they may be setting aside money to send those young ones to college. It may not always be college. It may be maybe even so much as a trade school. Because you look at what some of the trades people are making these days, like
Yeah.
plumbers, electricians.
Mm-hmm.
They make more than some school teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the school teacher's sitting there with a 4-year degree, maybe a master's degree, but a plumber's making more money. And a
Yeah.
plumber owns his or her own shop in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of cases.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have an idiot boss trying to tell them what to do. Now, they may have an idiot spouse, but that's a whole nother matter.
Yeah, that is exactly right. Look, I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you to wrap up, if you
Fire
don't mind.
away.
All right. So, what is your favorite business book, or what are you reading right now?
My favorite business book, this is an old one, goes back to the 1930s. It was called The Richest Man in Babylon. I think it was written by George Clayson, where they talk about things in the ancient world, but the basic premise is to people sit down, look at what they're spending each month, set aside 10%, just 10% of their total earnings each month to bankroll for themselves
Mm.
and let it grow. It may not mean going to lunch out every day. It may mean packing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but still, you cut back small amounts to where you eventually, one, pay down the bills, and some of the money that was going for debt now adds to the pile of wealth that you're building. And when you get a big enough pile of wealth, some of the things like land ownership becomes within reach. Land ownership, owning more or horses or whatever you're looking for. And just from those old parallels, a lot of it still holds true these days.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so much of that is mindset, right? How much do you think mindset plays into wealth management and wealth building?
A lot of it. Because now, when you start looking at some of the young people, I'm just going to pick on them for a minute because we've all been young at one point. A lot of them, they can't see past Saturday night.
Yep.
They want to have a cute outfit to wear. They want to go out with their buddies or go out with their friends, and they want to drink and party some more. But then at some point in time, when you get to be in your 30s, you don't want to be the oldest person in the club, and everybody said, look at all old geezer thinking he's cool.
Yeah, that's right.
By that point in time, you want to have all that party it's out of. You'll still go every once in a while, but by then, no, you're going to some place with more people your own age.
Yeah.
You may not want the music to be that loud, so you can't have a conversation without yelling at each other. But you need to just take it from that point. And by the time people are in their 30s, they're thinking about, okay, if I'm going to settle down, where am I going to settle down? I don't want to be the guy hanging out on the corner when I'm 40 with a cheap bottle of wine and $100 car that don't run anymore.
Yeah.
I want to have something more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And because another thing I'll tell people, look at it this way. The big question, what is the difference between a dream and an event? Now, events get funded. You may not have the money today to fund it, but with a proper plan in place and the way you organize your budget, eventually you're going to have enough cash on the table that when you withdraw it, you make that dream become a nice, pleasant reality. But without that money, those dreams may never come true.
Ralph, it's been such a pleasure. Are you still taking on clients? Can people reach out to you directly?
Yes. I'm still. I've never turned anybody away.
How
because
did they
even
do
when
that?
I was first starting out, I got no clients other than the ones I could create myself.
Yeah.
And so still that I don't turn anybody away because I say poverty does not have to be permanent. Now, with some people, they may be so far deep in debt, it may be permanent. But for a lot of young people, it does not have to be permanent. At some point in time, they're going to have a better job. Either they went through some sort of job training program, or they got hired at a better company that has better pay, better benefits, in which case it's not permanent.
Yeah. So how do people reach out to you directly?
A lot of mine these days are the children of some of my older ones from years ago.
Yeah. How do people reach out to you directly, Ralph?
Well, I'm in the yellow pages, or the phone book, you might say. To show you how long I've been around, I still have an 800 number.
Oh, you do?
Not many 800 numbers these days.
Yeah. What's that number?
That's 800-730-7943. And I've got clients, majority of them up here in the Massachusetts area, but I got a lot of them in Georgia, Florida, Texas, California, and even a couple of Navy guys. One of them is a submarine commander out in the Indian Ocean. Another guy is on an aircraft carrier out in the Pacific.
Wow.
And another guy somewhere out in the Atlantic. I'm not exactly sure where his ship is, but I know it's somewhere out there in the Atlantic.
That is fantastic. Ralph, it has been such a pleasure talking to you. I love your story. Thank you for your service. Thank you for
Thanks for your appreciation.
Yeah, and thank you for continuing to serve members of the military. I think that that's just really incredible. Once again, I want to thank Ralph for joining us. It's been such a pleasure hearing his story and his passion, his service to our country, and his service to those who continue to serve in the military. Reach out to Ralph, and he can help you out with your financial plans and your dreams. My name is Jay McFarland, and this has been another edition of Wealth Made Simple.